I'm Lauren, that awkward plant girl. Welcome back to my channel. It's so good to see you guys. Thank you guys for popping in. Today we are going to be building a terrarium that has taken me the longest a terrarium has ever taken. I started this project back in September of last year, and I naively thought when I started this project that it was going to be a single day project, maybe 2 or 3 max. But I naively thought, I even went and started to film for this particular video back in September, thinking this was going to be done in a day. This project, it's worth it, but my gosh, was it a nightmare. Without further ado, let me take you back in time to that very naive Lauren back in September who thought that this was only going to take a day. Today, we are going to be building a terrarium, and I'm really excited about it because I've never built a terrarium like this before, ever. Let me show you. Ta-da! This actually used to be a light fixture. I can show you how I took it all apart. It had a hanging chandelier inside it. This was actually the top of it, and then this was the base of it, and it just kind of hung down. I did mess it up and break this part at some point. Got it at the thrift store for $5, super inexpensive. Took all the parts off of it. We'll eventually use the chandelier and the light for something else eventually. But this was just the coolest looking terrarium case that I had ever seen. And I absolutely freaking love it. So I'm really excited to go ahead and build it. There are going to be a couple of things to fix. Like I said, I have to replace this because I broke it. I have to put a lid up here to trap the humidity. There are also holes in the base. So I've got to go ahead and put something down there to make it all kind of waterproof and just tighten it up. It does have, whoops, this right here, which is just the coolest thing ever. Oh my gosh. Poor lady. Had no idea what the heck she was getting into. No idea. Not a clue. You don't even know, lady. So this is going to be really cool because I'll be able to add some plants in like a vertical scape. Would have loved for this to be kind of like a vivarium eventually, but I don't know if it is going to be able to be that waterproof. I'm not sure exactly how I would do that. So for right now, it's just going to be a terrarium with the possibility of being more down the road because you can always take things apart and do it again. So that's the dealio with this guy, and let's get into it. And after all that, I didn't even get to start it that day because I didn't have the proper tools. Yep, didn't have the proper tools. Couldn't find the gloves, so I had to wait.
3 days later.
Day 2 rolls around and I have the gloves, I have all of my tools, I make sure that I have a trash bag so glass doesn't get everywhere, I lay it down on the floor, get it all comfy, I get my glove, I get my hammer, and I just start going ham on it. I definitely put it off for a little bit because it was very intimidating. I don't work with glass in that fashion, so I wasn't sure what to do with it. But I just kind of went to town on it. What I didn't realize was that the glass wasn't just set in there. It was actually glued in, and then 2 pieces of metal were folded over it, clamping it in at the same time. And it wasn't soldered in either. But I didn't really pay attention to that. I didn't really think much about it because I was just able to pull it out with the glove, and that was perfectly fine. But it does come into play later. I wish I had noticed and paid attention then, but it comes into play later. Next, after I got the broken glass out of it, I was able to straighten it out, got all the little chunks and pieces cleaned out the entire thing. The next step was to replace that little piece of glass there. I did go and talk to some glass working professionals. I could get very basic limited glass working tools and a little sheet of glass and cut out what I thought was going to work. Unfortunately, I didn't have the tools that I needed to work that into the metal, and I didn't have the proper tools to be able to cut the angles that were needed and to be able to make those measurements. So what I ended up deciding to do instead was to use a PET sheet. It is basically a polyacrylic thin film. I use them for the top of my terrariums all the time. You can cut them with scissors and a little razor blade, much less intimidating. Very sturdy. You can get them in different thicknesses as well. I just used the scraps I had lying around, and I made a couple of different cuts. It took me about a day to figure out exactly the different size and cuts that I needed. And then I used aquarium silicone to seal around it so that it would stay. Since it was a little bit thinner than the metal, it was a little bit thinner than the glass that the metal was holding on to before, and I didn't want it to be wiggling out of places. So I ended up sealing all around it, and that worked out really, really well. That was actually a pat on the back, semi-genius cheat hack thing for me. It worked. It's still holding up and it's doing great. No regrets with that. So far, so good. The next step was the most problematic of the entire thing. It's probably the hardest part of any project I have ever done. I have never been so challenged building something before. Most everything, it's an easy fix. It's just tenacity, changing the angle of something, getting a different tool. This was incredibly difficult for me to figure out because it had to be using specific plant-friendly materials. I couldn't have something that was going to poison my plants to build it. I needed to waterproof this thing. I really needed to waterproof the base so that when I watered it and there was the water reservoir in the bottom, it wasn't going to be leaking everywhere. So I thought it was going to be super easy. I thought since PET worked so well for the side that I would keep doing that for the base, that I'd be able just to silicone the base, cover the holes, cut out a little silicone or cut out a little hexagon shape for the PET, make it fit. Once I got that shape in there just right and I was able to cut it out from scraps left over from other terrariums, I decided to do a water test, and I was sure it was going to pass with flying colors. I had no doubts about it whatsoever. So I got one of the totes that I use for plant propagations. You can check out that video right here if you need, or to see what I'm talking about. So I took one of those clear plastic totes. I put the terrarium in there after it had cured, because silicone takes about 24 hours to 48 hours to cure. So got that settled, put the terrarium in there, poured water in it. Sure, it was gonna pass, and it looked like it was going to. So I got called away, came back about an hour later. All the water was out of the terrarium and in the tub. It was not sealed at all. Not at all. And I wasn't sure where it was leaking from because it was leaking from multiple spots. So I thought, I'll just let it dry, add more silicone to those spots, call it good. Tried it again, another water test. Added more silicone, another water test. Took that whole thing out and thought maybe I needed to remove that silicone and do a different shape and just angle it differently, maybe cut it smaller, closer to the base. This went on for about a month between multiple tries and waiting for it to cure and the scrap that I had to work with. It was not working. And then after that, I decided that I was going to scrap that entire idea and try something different to seal it. I needed something that was going to cover the entire base, that was going to seal every crack and crevice because it was leaking out of the sides as well. Because the glass wasn't soldered in, the water was able to go around the glass through that metal and leak out in places. Some places it was tightened up, and some places it was loose enough for it to go around. Some places there was enough silicone able to get in that crack to keep it all sealed up, and then other places there wasn't. So I needed something that was going to get in all of those cracks and crevices and cover the entire base and just seal it all up. And I didn't know what was going to do that. That was going to be plant friendly and non-toxic, because it was going to be the water reservoir for all of my plants. The roots would potentially grow down in there. Water would pick up whatever chemicals and whatnot, evaporate them up and come back down. It was definitely something that was going to be crucial to my plants. So I went down all the aquarium Reddits. I went down all the aquarium rabbit holes, went down all of the little pond tabs to try to figure out what they use for different outdoor ponds, because you don't want to poison the fish and the wildlife out there and the plant life, right? So what non-toxic products do they have? And then I found one that works really great for ponds. So I ended up digging into that deeper and found a clear version of it. The problem was it only came in a giant container that was $70. and I just needed a little tiny one for the little base of my terrarium. It was just a terrarium. So I ended up finally finding it right here on Amazon, just a little tiny container. It comes in 2 parts in 1 bag. It's a really cool thing. So you take the little middle bar out and then you mix it all together like 2 separate types of resin. Like when you're doing all of your resin work, you have the 2 chemicals, you mix them together. I couldn't use resin because it was toxic to my plants. But this stuff, I don't know what chemical they removed or used instead or whatever, but this makes it safe for plants, so I'm able to do that. So you take the 2 parts, you mix them together in the bag, and then you can pour it on whatever you want. And it makes it clear. That's really cool. I was not sure if it was going to be cloudy, bubbly, how any of that was going to work. So this was totally outside my wheelhouse. I've only done a little bit of resin work years ago, and it did not turn out good at all. So this was very concerning for me. I had no idea what it was going to end up looking like. And I didn't know how I was going to get this stuff out. If it didn't, like at least with silicone, you can pull it out and tear it out and kind of chisel it off with a razor blade and whatnot. This, I didn't even know. Like this was totally uncharted waters. So I poured it in and I poured it side to side and I kind of rotated the terrarium around and around and around, and then I set it upright so that it would mostly pool on the bottom and plug all of those holes. And I had put tape on the base under the holes, so that way if a little bit of this resin stuff was going to leak out, it would still plug up the holes, hopefully completely. And it did. It worked out really well. My big issue though, unfortunately, was that it made some of the sides look kind of funky, like it was watery and drippy, and there were splotches of it that were not completely covered or had more than others because it had started to drip back down. So I thought that I would get a second package of this stuff and that I could mix the stuff in the package and I could do one little bit on one side, one little bit on the next side, and just kind of lay it side to side and rotate it that way for an even flat layer to fill in those little bits that were higher and lower than others and made it look drippy. It didn't work. It didn't work at all. And then to boot, the stuff after you mix it, it hardens up. Even if you have it sealed up and closed up, because you only need a little bit for the one side, the one panel. So you leave it there to let that harden. You seal up the container and go to pour it on the next panel. It doesn't work. It's solidified in the package. I did not get a third package because each package is like $35, $40 each, which may be like a drop in the bucket for some people. But for me, on a totally experimental project that I got for $5 from a thrift store, I have already spent way more than I ever intended to spend. And I had other things that I had purchased for the actual building of the terrarium. So that was the end of it. I ended up doing a water test and the whole thing was sealed and it worked out perfectly. So this stuff is great. Just be aware that when you do that, you do have to lay it flat and that it solidifies in the package once the mixing starts. It's just like normal resin. I didn't find any information on that. Most people use it for ponds and just pour it in. I don't know if anybody's ever used it for anything other than the base of a terrarium or a pond. I didn't see any information on using it for something like this, so this was completely experimental. Highly recommend this product though. It's an amazing product. It sealed it up just fine. Like it will be a go-to project for future terrariums. It just wasn't what I was expecting. And finally, we can get to actually building the terrarium portion of this giant thing. Because all we've done so far over months and months of work is just seal the thing and add an extra piece of this plexi stuff. Like, oh my God, it was so much. Okay. So now that we're finally ready to add the actual terrarium elements to this, it goes much more smoothly and I'm much more excited. There are still new pieces to it and new things that I'm experimenting with, so it was still a learning experience from here on. So the first thing I opted to do was add perlite in the base for the water reservoir. We always need a water reservoir. There's lots of different choices for whatever you want to do with a terrarium, but I opted for perlite because I was really hoping that the white would help make that watery look disappear on the glass. I was not enjoying that, and I didn't want it to ruin the aesthetic of the entire project. I wanted the main focus to be on the terrarium itself, not on mistakes that I had made with it, of course. So after the water reservoir, I put down the Josh's Frogs layer. It's just a mesh. I always get it from Josh's Frogs. Their products are amazing. They're a fantastic company. Next, I added some sphagnum moss. I chop up the sphagnum moss really fine. I learned to chop up the sphagnum moss from Ben over at Worcester Terrariums. His content is amazing. Lots of great stuff over there. Definitely check him out if you're into terrariums. This trick has worked amazingly well. I also chop it up when I'm making the soil mixes for my terrariums. I like to add in worm castings. I also add in some horticultural charcoal, some bark. It just depends on what I have going around. I also used some type of coconut coir as well. I just had it lying around, and it's just stuff that I accumulate over time. So I just mixed it all in there basically. After I got all of that in there, I wanted to start building a rock wall from the base up. I'm also using a new product. I've never built a stone backscape before, so this is totally new to me as well. I'm using an aquarium silicone, and then I'm also using the black pond and stone great stuff, which is basically like a foam that expands and helps all the cracks and crevices, but it also blends in with the rock. It took me a little bit to figure out the shape that I wanted for it, but I think it turned out really well. After I got that all situated and I built it up as much as I needed it to be, it looked pretty good from there, so I just turned it kind of on a side and angled it a little bit so that way it could dry without going all over the place. A lot of other people will silicone and seal it to the back. I've seen that in a lot of terrariums, but because I wanted to test out everything else and I wasn't sure exactly where I was going to have it laid out, I needed to have those layers in the base first before I figured out where the rock wall was going to go. This is just a very intricate project for me with a lot of different things, and I'm also learning as I go. So if you end up doing something similar, definitely look into the technique where you can glue the rocks to the glass as you go along, and you can use the aquarium silicone to do that as well. There's also plant-friendly glue that you can use. I just didn't have that at the time, and it wasn't something I was willing to wait for to order because I really wanted to get this project done. I didn't really want to carve the foam this time. I have done that before, and what I really wanted to do was see if I could keep that rocky kind of look, but add bark and sphagnum moss over it so that I could have plants kind of tucked in and growing up and climbing up. And I kind of added that on there. I used silicone to help make it stick because it's all plant friendly, so that works out really well. Next, after that, it was time to add the plants. Finally, the best part, adding all of the plants. put in a lot of different kinds of plants and just kind of angled them where I wanted them to go. So most of the plants that I chose were actually cuttings off of other plants. I had specifically chosen these plants, and I had specifically chosen to do cuttings because when you add in other types of soil and whatnot from other places, they will have other kinds of bacteria and fungus, and then you mix that all into a closed environment and it can cause a lot of problems. So I really tried to make sure that I was taking cuttings and then they could root inside the terrarium and adapt to the terrarium environment. Now, when you do this, there is going to be some risk that some of these plants are going to die off. They may not like the soil mixture, they may die off. So make sure if you're going to do something like this, you're not taking too much of the original mother plant just in case you need to replant it. And also you want to make sure that you're taking a large enough cutting that maybe a few leaves can die, but it can still keep going and look good later. It's just kind of a balancing act. And if it does die, it's okay, it happens. A lot of people don't like to talk about that happening in terrariums. They like to make it look like it just, you pop it all in there and then it just does fantastic and explodes from there. But really, it's normal to have a little bit of a dieback, especially when you're using cuttings. Not everything will make it, and you may have to replant some stuff later. So, but cuttings is kind of the way to go in a closed environment. That's a little odd. And I really didn't want to contaminate all of the work that I had done and have to redo any of this. Went with cuttings for a lot of things, or things that were already in sphagnum moss. And I think it looks really, really fantastic. I really like the selaginella in there. I really do think that those jewel orchids are going to become a main focus point, and I'm excited to see how it grows up the back. I ended up adjusting my bookshelf a little bit. I have it here with a Scindapsus. It's pretty fantastic, and I really wanted to kind of have it going up the back as well and really make this specific terrarium pop out on my bookshelf. This was the longest project I have ever done. I have never had a project take me this long that I've actually completed. If it takes me more than a month or two to finish a project, it's not getting done. Honestly, it will not get done. I will shove it in a corner. It will never, ever happen. Maybe years and years later, I'll look at it again and get rid of it, or start to work on a little more and never finish it. Like, if I'm excited about a project, it's generally something that I'm going to get done as soon as I possibly can, and I hyper focus on it. So this project was very difficult for me in many aspects. And the reason I'm so excited to share this with you and to share this journey with you is because a lot of people think, I've never done that before, I can't do that. That's too complicated, it's too much. People are scared to just try regular terrariums in a jar, you know? Like, don't be afraid to step outside your box and try something new. Don't be afraid to do multiple things. And if it takes a while to do, that's okay. It's just you learning and adapting and adjusting. So for me, using the black ponds and cracks and then not scraping off the foam and working with the rocks, like, that was an entirely new thing, an entirely new look. And I'm really excited to see what it's going to look like as it gets grown over. I'm very pleased with how it turned out. And I'm really glad that I ended up trying that instead of always doing the white foam, which is what I've always worked with and what has been recommended to me before. And then I actually used it in another terrarium that I'm going to show you in another video. So make sure you subscribe and stick around so you can check out another new kind of terrarium that I'm working on. Let me know what you think. Drop comments down below. What are some unique terrariums that you've worked with? Do you have any projects that you're working really hard to finish? Let me know. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate your time, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!